Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I am Michel Benoit, senior scientist working at EDF R&D in the Saint-Venant Hydraulics Laboratory in Chateau, and I will have the pleasure to work as the president of this examination committee of Gonnery Le Creuzanet. So I will first introduce the members of the committee, starting with the three referees. So we have Professor Detlef Tamer, who is from the University of Hamburg, but currently in Brazil. Hello, Detlef. Okay. Then we have Caroline Katzman, who is also a professor at Delft, at TU Delft in Netherlands. And then we have Catherine Meurferec, who is a professor at Université de Bretagne Occidentale, UBO. Okay. And then we have Laurent Bopp, who is a research director from CNRS in LMD here. And we have Gilles Grandjean, who is a scientific director at BRGM here. And finally, we have Sabrina Speich, who is a professor here at ENS and LMD.
Thank you very much.
So, Gonnery, so you will have 45 minutes to present an overview of your work, covering sea level rise and coastal risks, including marine flooding and coastal erosion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of the jury. I would like to thank I'm sorry, just a technical detail here. Oh, okay, not working. And now I would like to thank the jury for evaluating my work, and especially Sabrina Speich for supervising me, and all of you for being there to see this presentation about sea level rise and coastal risks. This is a research topic I have been investigating over the last 15 years, mainly at BRGM. And I'm starting this presentation with this small town in Upper Normandy, where you see many problems that apply in many other regions in France and in the world. So first, you see that the front line, the shoreline, the buildings in this municipality are really concentrated close to the shoreline, which means they are highly exposed to flooding and to waves during storms. And also, because of that, of course, there is some protection work, there is some coastal defenses, and the dike here is actually this area. There is a dike, and there is also an infrastructure to prevent the water from the sea to enter into the estuary and to flood the meadows that are on the left. So this type of situation that we have more buildings, more people, more activities close to the coast applies in many regions in the world, and especially in France, where there is a factor of 2 or 2.5 compared to the municipalities inland. So as a consequence, during extreme events like Xynthia in 2010, we have disasters that involve a lot of people and a lot of damages. And for example, this storm that occurred in 2010 caused the death of 50 people, mainly in this area, where people could not escape from their houses because they were just one floor. They were just one floor. And also, you see a lot of damages due to erosion. During this single storm, you can experience 10 to 20 meters of retreat during the storm Xynthia. This event caused more than 750 million of uninsured costs, and this happened 15 years ago. But in average, the current estimate from the scientific community and from the insurance industry are that the cost of damages from marine flooding in France are between 60 and 100 million euros. This is projected to increase by a factor of 2 to 10, depending on the study, by 2050. So you can see that even at this time scale that are relatively short, 3 decades from now, there are a lot of uncertainties about the magnitude of change due to sea level rise. So there is one research assumption in my work. It is that sea level rise is about to completely change this game. Basically, we're in a situation, we're changing from a situation where sea level were stable since millennia, and they are going to rise during the coming millennia. And so far, what we have seen is a 20 centimeters of global sea level rise. You can see that on this curve since 1 century, mainly due to climate change. And we will have 20 additional centimeters over the coming 3 or 4 decades. And compared to other impacts of climate change, like heat waves or like drought, we will probably stabilize the hazard of drought, of heat wave, when we have stabilized climate change at 1.5 or 2 degrees. But sea level will continue to rise for centuries due to the delayed melting of Antarctica and Greenland. The warmer the climate, the larger the magnitude and rate of sea level rise, of course. In addition to that, there is an additional source of uncertainty, which is the response of Antarctica to global warming. If Antarctica responds quickly to global warming, we cannot exclude a scenario where sea levels rise well above the projected range of sea levels. And this is the dashed line, which you can see here, which leads to 1.5 meter in 2100. So we are working about coastal impact studies. And so the curves that I showed before are global. They are from the IPCC report. If you want to work with coastal studies, you need a relative sea level change at the coast. And these relative sea level rise at the coast need to take into account the processes that you can see in this figure. So basically the non-uniform warming of the ocean, which is due to the ocean circulation, the inverse barometric effect, the changes in salinity, and the non-uniform warming. Relative sea level change due to the ocean warming are not uniform at the scale of ocean. There is also a role of the melting of polar ice sheet and glaciers. So as we are losing masses, mainly on the poles, the shape of the Earth is changing. So there is a deformation in response to this melting. There is also gravitational changes and rotational changes. The rotation of the Earth is changing. This is relatively well modeled since the fifth assessment report. But there is an additional component which accounts for changes at the coast, which are the solid Earth deformation at the coast. They can be due to groundwater pumping. They can be due to tectonic processes. And these processes are probably the least known. In Southeast Asia, they account for centimeters of sea level rise in area where groundwater pumping takes place. So we have a problem to understand relative sea level changes in areas which are affected by these ground deformations. So in this research, I have been focusing, my main objective has been to inform coastal adaptation to sea level rise and climate change. It's not me alone, it's a community of researchers who are addressing these questions. And maybe I have split this question into 3 sub-questions. Can we already observe coastal impacts of climate change and sea level rise? So for example, this small islet here in the lagoon of New Caledonia has been evolving in the past. You can see the former shoreline that have been analyzed by my colleague Manuel Garcin. Is there any role of sea level rise to explain a part of these changes? So this is the question about current impacts, detection and attribution. The second topic is how, when, and where coastal impacts are going to be materialized. So an example here from the US in an area which is affected by both climate-induced sea level rise and subsidence. We experience more frequent and more intense chronic flooding events at high tides. So how will they evolve? And the last one is how to evaluate and manage the uncertainties in projections. So again, about this type of chronic flooding events, you can see that in this particular case, in Guadeloupe, it's a very low-lying area. We can expect between 50 and 300 days of chronic flooding events in 2040. So the uncertainties are very large. Can we understand them better? Can we reduce them? And so after these questions, there are some perspectives. I started to work with them more recently to examine what are the adaptation options and opportunities that we have and where, when, and how they can be implemented. So this will follow the plan, the outline of my presentation here follows this framework. So how did we address these questions? So first, it's a collective work. I worked with my colleague at BRGM, so many are here, thank you very much, with colleagues in other French institutions and in European and other areas. So many thanks to all, because this work is really only possible with you. I've been doing that at BRGM, which is the French Geological Survey. It's a public institute under the responsibility of the Ministry of Environment, Research and Economy. So BRGM is basically responsible for producing this geological map. which I didn't bring myself, but it's here. And it supports not only research, but also public policies. So if I summarize a bit what I've done in relation to the 3 research topics which I did before, I started to work as a researcher in 2006, I would say. First, trying to respond about to questions that the Ministry of Environment was asking about risk and insurance in 2009. And then I worked more about the detection of coastal impacts in a French project led by Annie Cazenave. And this was the topic of my PhD with Franck Lavigne at the University of Paris. And then I worked with many colleagues, but in particular Jérémy Romer, about the uncertainties. So understanding the uncertainties in projections. And this is also work that has been very much influenced by the sea level grand challenge of the WCRP, which Detlef has been actually coordinating. And more recently, I'm working on services for coastal adaptation within French groups, within a European project, and the IPCC. So if we start with attribution of coastal impacts to sea level rise, so around the world, you have many devices like this one. These are tide gauge. They are monitoring sea level changes. If you average this tide gauge over time, you can see in many places that sea level are rising, mean sea level rising, and the extreme sea level are rising consistently with the mean. You can see that. So this has been studied 15 years ago by researchers like Melissa Melendez and Philip Woodworth. And it's summarized here in this IPCC figure, where you see that as the mean sea levels are rising, extreme events that occur once a month, once a year, once a decade are actually shifted upwards. And you get more frequent and more intense extreme events very consistently with the increase of sea level, mean sea levels. So this is the main reasons for extreme sea level changes, but there are other reasons to that. This is shown in this figure here. So you see mean sea level are causing a lot of the changes in extreme sea levels, but there is also a role of the teleconnection patterns like the Northern Atlantic Oscillation, like El Niño, etc. They can be they can either moderate or aggravate the rise of extreme sea levels due to sea level rise. So as extreme water levels are rising, we see more and more frequent and more severe chronic flooding events at high tides. And the principle is very high. Here is very simple. You can see here the distribution of high tide water levels in Norfolk, USA. This is work done by Bill Sweet at NOAA. He has been pioneering this research topic. And as sea level are rising, this distribution is shifted upwards. And so you get more minor, moderate, and major events. In the future, the number of days by which you have this type of high tide events is increasing drastically up to every day per year if you don't raise the defenses. What we did in this area is, together with my colleague Rémi Thieblemont, who is here, we identified some early responders, some early places where we first start to observe, to monitor this type of event in France. Here it's in Cayenne, in French Guiana. This event on the 16th of October 2020 can be hardly explained without sea level rise. So it's not something that is due to swell or anything like this. Of course, this type of event occurs earlier in subsiding area. So I'm skipping attribution of extreme events due to storms and hurricanes, basically because I didn't work a lot on this topic and others did. I'm going directly to erosion, and erosion is a process that is favored by sea level rise, because with higher sea levels, you expect the junto to be more frequently hit by waves. You expect the equilibrium profile of the beach to be adjusted so that it keeps approximately the same shape, but for that, with unique sediments, they are taken from the coast. And at some point, you have some permanent flooding. So these 3 processes explain why we expect more erosion due to sea level rise, but there are many other processes that can cause erosion. And there are waves, the changing supply of sediment by rivers, the human activities like coastal engineering, beach nourishment, sand quarrying, etc. And so if we want to really identify what is the role of sea level rise in observed erosion, then we need to separate all these processes, which is extremely difficult given the coastal data that we have, given the precision and accuracy of erosion model that we have. And so what we did here is we made a review of methods and results of these approaches. We can see that many of the studies, without surprise, were conducted in area where we have a lot of sea level change data, where we have a lot of shoreline change data. And until the early 2010, the consensus was that we have some evidence from some subsiding area that that erosion is increased with higher sea levels, but some studies interpret differently the data. So there is not a full consensus across the community in there, and much of the literature was driven by studies using the same data sets in the Chesapeake Bay in the USA. And increasingly, since the mid-2010s, we are identifying what Christopher Sharples, a scientist in Tasmania, is calling early responders, so coastal sites that are responding earlier than the average to sea level changes. And for example, one potential example of such early responder could be the Tetiaroa Atoll. So the Tetiaroa Atoll is made of islets that are moving on the reef flat here. The reef flat is submerged, and they are moving. This is normal. This is expected. But we can note that there is a lot of erosion here on the lagoon side of these northern islets. Why is there this erosion? It could be due to the trade waves being much more transmitted. The energy from the trade waves crosses more easily the reef flat because there are higher sea levels, and it favors erosion in the lagoon. So we are not saying that we have made a clear attribution here. It's an interpretation from a geomorphologist, but it could be an early responder to sea level rise. And the point is that since the mid-2010s, many geomorphologists are publishing studies suggesting that they have found some such early responders. So what are the perspectives on attribution of coastal impacts? So first, I think we need to say that attribution has been difficult so far with relative low sea level changes, but it's being much easier to observe today with the acceleration that we are experiencing, and especially for high tide sea levels. There are obvious research avenues. So we are getting new subsidence data. So with my colleagues in the back, Daniel Rocoul and Marcel de Michele, we worked a lot with INSAR data, with the satellite interferometry, to monitor the vertical ground motion of the coast, how they contribute to relative sea level changes. And 10 years ago, we had to perform a lot of studies to do that. Today, we have a service, which is the European Ground Motion, which delivers the data at the scale of Europe. So it's really something that is new and which offers a lot of research opportunities. We have also a growing amount of shoreline change data, including from satellites. And something that is really important, I think, is that model, and especially erosion model, which are very uncertain, could be tested against observations using this data. Another question is, what is the value of this research for stakeholders? So first, I think we have to say that attribution has a strong media interest. The media are interested to know whether they see erosion due to sea level rise, to climate change, or to other processes. But it could be also useful to avoid that we adapt too late to sea level rise. So since we don't know exactly how the different beaches will respond to sea level rise, being able to detect an early impact of sea level rise at a specific beaches could allow to adapt in a timely manner and avoid being too late to take action. There are other potential applications like informing coastal adaptation funding mechanism and maybe even climate mitigation. So I'm going to approaches to assess future impacts. So to assess future impact, we can separate the method in three different approaches. So the first one is very old. Actually, it has been done since the 90s, Vivian Gornitz. The multi-criteria approaches, basically we are using the data that we have, the topography, the geology, the sedimentology, the exposure to waves, and based on this method, we aggregate the different data and we find where area are the most sensitive to sea level rise. So it's basically using a geographic information system. I've been doing that like many. It's useful to understand where sea level rise impacts are the most important potentially, but it's not very useful to understand what is the timing of adaptation. When could we adapt to these impacts? Another approach is to use model-based model approaches. And typically, my colleagues working on this topic, like Rodrigo Pedreros, are doing modeling of high tide total water levels during storms. So using hydrodynamic models that models the impact of the winds, of the reduced pressure and the waves on the total water levels of the coast and how this can inundate the area. The limitation of these models is that they cannot account for the changes in bathymetry, meaning that the sediment transport is not taken into account there, and it affects in turn the total water levels. So there is a limitation even in these approaches. And another research avenue is actually using either data-driven or what they call appropriate complexity models that do not ambition to resolve the details of physical equations, but rather focus on reproducing the shapes in response to changing waves, to changing sea levels. So I'm going to show an example of a data-driven model. So here we are in southwestern France. So it's a sandy shoreline. There is a southern drift of sediments. And we have a lot of data from our colleagues in the University of Bordeaux, Bruno Castel, and from the observatory, in the coastal observatory of Aquitaine. So we can use this data to evaluate what are the current trends, what is the current variability of shoreline changes due to seasonal changes, due to storms, etc. And add on the top of that impact of sea level rise. So the future shoreline position is in this exercise is, you can see the shoreline position, 0 is the current, accretion is minus something, and retreat is there. And you can see that in the past, we have had maybe some erosion, but it is projected, of course, to erode more. And the larger the global warming, the more erosion we have. It's a full probabilistic approach. So every component of this future shoreline position is actually uncertain. We make the sum of them. And what is important in this approach is that we have a structural uncertainty in there. Typically, we don't know exactly what is the response of the beach to sea level rise. There are two models available. One has been developed by Green in 1960. It predicts that for 1 meter of sea level rise, you get approximately 100 meters of shoreline change or shoreline retreat. And the other one was developed by Roche-Ranasinghe in 2012, and it predicts that for 1 meter of sea level rise, you get more than like 10 meters of retreat. It depends on the parameters of the beach, but these are the order of magnitudes there. And in practice, this source of uncertainty, this structural uncertainty due to the fact that we don't know actually which model to use, accounts for 20 to 40% of the variance of the spread of the projection, which are here, depending on the site. So we have very large uncertainties, and we even have more uncertainties than that, because, for example, the collapse of Antarctica, which will result in a very large retreat of the shoreline, is hidden in the upper quantiles of these projections. And so we don't know exactly, we cannot materialize really the value of this by just looking at the higher quantiles. So what are the perspectives on coastal impact assessments? So I think there is we have been doing a lot of work on observing subsidence, but now it's time to see how we project subsidence. We are basically doing some extrapolation from existing data today, and we could do better because if we know the process, we know up to when we can extrapolate and when we can stop extrapolating or doing something more complex. Projection of coastal impacts beyond 2100 are starting to be relevant for stakeholders because 2100 is in only 75 years from now. So there are policies addressing the next century. Regarding model-based approaches, it's clear that there is a lot of work to do in food modeling. I will speak a bit about that later, with the development of new models, with better data, especially LiDAR data. For erosion and coastal evolution, it's clear that we have to live with uncertainty for a long time because we cannot expect to resolve this question about the structural uncertainties of erosion model due to sea level rise over the coming decade. But we can still use the existing model to explore the interaction between flood and erosion. And I'm showing here an example from a paper with Alexandra Toymil, showing that if we don't consider erosion here in Narrabeen Beach in Australia, we completely underestimate future flooding. This is obvious. Everybody knows that since a long time, but okay, this type of model can help explore this type of problem. And I think also we have to recognize that for coastal impacts, we had a big problem about the transparency of the models that we are using. Many of the studies that have been published about future impacts of sea level rise are based on models that are not easily accessible, like DIVA, and this must be improved. We need transparent models now. So what is the value of stakeholders from these coastal impact assessments? At local scale, it's obvious, it's for land use planning and the timing of adaptation. At broad scale, it's more controversial because many scientists say, and they are right, that broad scale coastal flood assessments are relatively uncertain. But it's still used for global, national, and regional adaptation policies. When you need to decide where to allocate funding, you still need this type of model. I'm going to uncertainties. And so the first point is that for uncertainties, if you use a typical approach, modeling approach about the coastal impact of sea level rise, you need to go across a range of models from emission to climate models to regional models to local impact models that all include uncertainties. And these models can include some uncertainties that are well captured by one single probability distributions, but it's not the case for all of them. And for example, two big problems are the potential collapse of Antarctica, because we don't know the probability of this collapse, and also coastal erosion models, because we don't know which one to use. And so here there is a very straightforward approach, which is to use what we call either a high-end scenario or a low likelihood, high impact storyline, which helps to explore what could be the impacts of such an event. But we propose another approach, which is based on, we call that extra probabilistic sea level projections. The principle is to use not only one single projections, but a set of projections that are located here in a cumulative distribution diagram. So you see the probability of exceeding, for example, 1 meter of sea level rise. The probability here is 0.4, but actually we cannot say. There are so many probability distribution. The probability ranges from 0 to 1 actually. So these values are deeply uncertain, in fact. And this approach has several advantages. First, it allows to assess the consensus or disagreement between experts. And the approach has been used in the 6 assessment reports. When they speak about P boxes, these are P boxes. And the second advantage is that you can do exactly the same things that you do with probabilistic projections. So you can propagate uncertainties using these extra probabilistic functions. You can perform sensitivity analysis. You can examine the potential to reduce uncertainties. So for example, either by selecting a specific user tolerance. If, for example, your user is not risk tolerant, he may skip this part of the distribution because the probability of exceeding 2 meters in this projection is less than 60%. And we can also assess the potential to reduce ambiguity. Ambiguity being understood here as the surface between the upper and the lower cumulative distribution. So it's an approach that has been proposed, which has been used in the 6 assessment report for the sea level projection. The value for stakeholders is a topic of research. So what are the perspectives here again? We have to acknowledge that uncertainties on ice sheets and impact models will remain. There is some potential to basically we have today 2 or 3 approaches to assess future high ends. So the potential for low likelihood high impact events. It could be based on model, it could be based on expert elicitation, and there are several expert elicitation approaches. And these different approaches could be used in a more, let's say, open way, they could cross-fertilize themselves instead of competing one another. I think there is research to be done there. But the most important research topic here is to go beyond theory, because these high-end scenarios, they are theoretically useful for stakeholders with who have a high risk aversion, like owner of critical long-living infrastructure, like here in Antwerpen. But in practice, when we interact with stakeholders, we don't see this need appearing very clearly. And we can even question whether private owners or public owners, like a coastal conservation agency, who are ready to accept losses, maybe they are actually in need of this high-end scenario, because they need to demonstrate that their policy, which is softer, which includes less coastal engineering, does not affect their neighbors. And so maybe there are more users of high-end scenarios that we saw before. And there is another topic, which is what is the utility of low-end scenario? So low-end scenarios are on that side of the distribution, and low-end scenarios are theoretically useful for assessing the minimum adaptation needs. But in practice, we never met any stakeholders who requested a low-end scenario. But in practice, we see also that many coastal decisions just ignore future sea level rise, or they apply regulation minimally, taking into account 20 centimeters of sea level rise by 2100. Everybody knows that this is not credible. And so maybe the low end could be useful. If I summarize this research, so I think maybe here you have again the curve of past and future sea level rise from the IPCC. And based on this research, I would say that maybe we understand better the times of emergence of future impacts of sea level rise. So we are going from a situation where natural variability and human intervention are dominating the shoreline change variability and the impacts, to another era where sea level rise would change completely these hazards. And we're starting to see a lot of evidence about more frequent and more intense high tide flooding and rising water tables. For storms, it's more difficult to assess because these are extreme events, and it occurs maybe the last big event in France was Cynthia in 2010. So during one event, you lose 700 million of euro and 50 people. And it's difficult to make trends out of this type of events. And for erosion and permanent flooding, we expect them to take place later, to emerge later, but we're starting to identify early responders. And of course, time of emergence will differ depending on the coastal location, depending on the settings, on the local coastal geomorphology. So I'm going to the perspective of this work. So the first perspective is very straightforward. With better data, with better models, with increased computing facilities, we could redo what we have done before, assessing risks, but better than before. So this is the project that I'm coordinating. It's the Coquelicot project. It's a European project with many partners that you can see here. And the principle of this project is to deliver deliver future projections of coastal flooding, both in terms of hazard and in terms of risks at the scale of Europe. But not only deliver the data, but deliver them in a fair way, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So being more transparent about the data that we are producing and allowing for more reuse, because this is probably what has been missing in the past. So here you can see some early results. You can see in red the coastal floodplain, so areas which are below sea levels at high tide. But in practice, even if there were no defenses, the areas that would be flooded are just the area in black, because flooding takes place only at high tide during half an hour, actually. So more with this work, we expect more precise projections, but we know that there will be a lot of limitation due to we have a digital elevation model with a resolution of 25 meters. We need at least 10 meters. A second perspective is about the interaction between scientists on sea level rise, on impacts, and decision making. Previously, this has been done a lot within the WCRP Sea Level Grand Challenge at global scale. And today, this is taking place within projects, and especially the Protect project, which you can see here, with case study in France, in the Netherlands, in the Maldives, and in Greenland. But there are other initiatives that are emerging, like the Knowledge Hub of Sea Level Rise in Europe, like the PEERS initiative in the US, which is global actually. And so I think this topic is clearly, well, it's clearly something that is useful and expected from the coastal adaptation practitioners. One challenge here is how do we go beyond the usual suspects, the practitioners that we know since a long time and who we meet every time actually. And finally, there is a last challenge, which I think is probably the most interesting because the previous things will happen with or without me, I would say. There are many colleagues working on that, and I'm not absolutely essential to realize these projects. But there is something maybe which is more challenging for me and maybe more interesting for me. I think we are trying to deliver climate services, so climate services to support coastal adaptation. And in the vision of many climate services providers, these climate services are neutral. The decision belongs to the decision makers, and the service just provide data like future risks, future exposed people, and things like this. In practice, it is known by social scientists, like this paper in 2014, that climate services are not neutral. They can be instrumentalized by a vested interest. For example, you can imagine a climate services raising the problems of future flooding in a specific area, then the promotion of relocation of the solution. But in practice, the idea is just to promote, to make some hotels or things like this. This is something that happens on the ground. So we cannot assume that climate services are neutral. And also we have to acknowledge that climate services that remain neutral on responses ignore the efforts of researchers and engineers to evaluate the potential responses. Like in the IPCC in 2022, here you can see two different options for coastal management. One is focused on coastal defense and hardening, and it has some benefits across the Sustainable Development Goals, but not many. A more integrated approach that considers all users, all different, the fisheries, etc., brings much more co-benefits on the ground. Another risk that has been identified by Catherine in particular, is that climate services that focus on the techniques moves the debate from political choices to debates about the application of regulations or norms. And by doing that, we are missing a big opportunity. We are missing the opportunity to have more resilient coastal area, take the advantage of the transformation that cannot be avoided to make more resilient coastal ecosystems. So I think coastal services could adopt a broader perspective to support more explicitly coastal resilient development. So in other words, if we take again this figure from the IPCC, here we have two worlds. One is a world where we implement incremental adaptation. We fail to meet the Paris target and to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have a lot of problems about erosion, but not only. We have lost a lot of marine resources. We have polluted soils, etc. And the other one is a world in which we have achieved the Sustainable Development Goals. We have made a transformational adaptation. We have agroecology. We have a more healthy coastal ecosystem. This is still achievable. And obviously, no one can be neutral between these two options. So I think we need to be more explicit when we deliver climate services about the fact that adaptation to sea level rise can be an opportunity to recreate more resilient coastal environment and ecosystem, and being more explicit about the pathways that lead to the picture on the right and try to avoid the picture on the left. So for this purpose, I have proposed a research project. It's 3 years. It's a bit ambitious over three years, but we could try. So with 3 components, actually. So first component, which would be basically a review of the existing transformation for achieving climate resilient development in the coastal area, about climate and socio-economic scenario for coastal zones. We have a big problem with socio-economic scenario that are used today in the IPCC report. There are 5 socio-economic scenarios, pathways. None of them allows to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals related to biodiversity losses. So we need others. And also something to develop coastal archetypes. Then we could have an application over small island in Europe and for high health. And in the end, the value of this research would be to help coastal stakeholders envision transformations toward coastal resilient development. So what has been, so this is the project I've been proposing, but of course it's not funded yet. Some components of it are funded. What is the impact of this research? So first, it has been a community effort. So I've been just working with many colleagues. What has been interesting is that I've seen topics that have expanded a lot, like the evaluation of risks and uncertainties to sea level rise, and to a lesser extent, nature-based solution. And I'm not working a lot on that topic. But I have also seen new emerging topics, like the extra probabilistic approaches toward uncertainties, the adaptation to committed sea level changes. So here, an example, a paper in 2023. We argue in this paper that we can take action today to limit the problem in the future, to prepare for sea level rise when they exceed 2 meters, probably much after 2100, but this will happen sooner or later. And coastal resilient development, as I said before. This research has been useful also to support public policies like IPCC report, national assessments. The last one in 2015 by Jean Jouzel. We can note that after the 5th assessment report, there was a national assessment, and there has been no national assessment, to my knowledge, after the 6th assessment report. For the insurance sector, for others. But the main impact is actually people and students and colleagues with whom I'm working. So the conclusion, I think that today we have a lot of evidence from, for example, the court of auditors in France, from think tanks, that adaptation funding is not sufficient, whether for research or for applications. That the objectives of adaptation are not clearly set out. That the regulations on adaptation are being circumvented in a number of cases. And so if we are serious about the challenge, it's not only about funding research, it's also about reflecting our ambitions in policies, in budget, and in implementations. And so in my manuscript, which is here, I've taken this word from a book which I love a lot. So this is a swordman, D'Artagnan, who meets the Prime Minister of France, Mazarin. And Mazarin wants to achieve great things, but with little means because he's a cheap man, according to Alexandre Dumas. And so D'Artagnan tells, okay, you know, great ambitions are generally poorly achieved with scarce resources. And I think if there is any swordman here, maybe you could speak to our current leaders and say. So I would like to thank you for your attention. So again, many thanks to all my colleagues, to the jury for evaluating my work. I cannot cite everyone, but I would like to mention 2 people. So the first one is Annie Cazenave, because she has been supporting me a lot for my research. And the second one is Elodie Charles, because she was the first PhD student I supervised, not me, actually it was Deborah Higuier, but I was involved, and she passed away 1 year ago. And I think I would like us to remember her. Thank you.
Perfect on time. Thank you very much, Gunnar. So we will start now the discussion session, and we will start with 3 referees.